Hey, it's Moot Booxle, and this is a Moot Point. Today I want to talk about the ARP Odyssey. I think this is one of the most versatile synthesizers ever made, and it's one of the first portable synthesizers, and it's still one of the best. This is not intended to be exactly a tutorial on how to use the ARP Odyssey. I'm going to kind of speed through a few things, but what I'm going to show you is how I use this thing for bass. I'm in a trio with guitar, drums, and keys, and I play left-hand bass solely on the Odyssey. And I want to explain a little bit about how I do that and why I think it is my ideal bass machine. First of all, a little bit about how the Odyssey is structured, okay? You have two oscillators, and then you have the modulation section for each oscillator, which is independent, completely independent, and that's one of the things that makes this synth so versatile. And you have a sample and hold section, you have a LFO, which is only just a rate. The different waveforms of the LFO are engaged at the different modulation points. So you can, either have like sine or square here on oscillator 1. For example, this modulation is very important, as is the sample and hold. The color-coded slider caps are very helpful. And that's one reason I really like. There's a lot of reasons I love the old white livery, but I really do. I like being able to see the color-coded sliders on stage, even on a dark stage, and it's hard to do that on the Marc III version, which is the more common version. See, oscillator 1 is blue, oscillator 2 is green. So stuff like that, Anything having to do with the LFO is this kind of like coral color. And, envelopes are red, and you've got filters and things like control voltage. Those things are black. So it's all really well thought out, even though it kind of looks random. So how I set up my basic bass patch is, first of all, I'm down in the low octave. Okay. I have it set up to where the ADSR is controlling the filter and the AR is controlling the VCA, which is the final output. I leave the drive on. I leave the output, so to speak. This is kind of your de facto volume slider, I guess, but I find that the thing just sounds better when you give it the full, you give it the full juice, and then you basically just control your volume by how much you're bringing into the mixer, which obviously does change the timbre somewhat. There's pros and cons. I keep the drive on, and I keep this normally in the Mark I original 2-pole filter sound. To me, that is the ARP sound. The other thing is a little too Moog-like, and it's like, if I'm going to do that, I'm just going to use a Moog. Anyway, so this is this filter. And I actually do keep the resonance pretty high. I roll off the high end at the mixing board just a little bit to tame some of the aggressiveness and to make it a little more round on stage, because I'm trying to simulate like a bass and sometimes like an organ bass, and then sometimes I want to do full-on Stevie Wonder synth bass. So how do I do all these different sounds? Okay, first of all, I'm leaving the release time of the VCA open just a little bit, to where if the filter was just, if I have, I'll just open the filter all the way. That's about how long of a decay this thing would normally be. But obviously I'm not using that. And I do run the resonance pretty high. This way I have a tiny little movement between a normal round kind of fat bass sound and more of like a Herbie Hancock chameleon type of sound. I can sort of like within, a few millimeters go from normal bass guitar sound to Stevie Wonder to full on Herbie Hancock. So how I actually control the release of notes is with the release of the filter. I leave the filter envelope amount at about half to start. That's kind of my baseline, no pun intended. Okay. And the decay controls, I leave the sustain pretty high. And the decay sort of controls, how much thump I get. So if I'm going for a more rounded thing, I'll give it more decay. So. And then the release of the notes, of course, is with the release of the filter. So if I'm doing a swing thing, I'll be like, I'll make it real dark, like a upright bass, But of course, you kind of adjust that to taste. And that's what I adjust the most during a gig. So if you want funky stuff, you need to, back it off. Of course, if you want funky stuff, you need to give it a little more envelope. Okay, we haven't talked about Oscillator 2 yet. Okay, first of all, if you can see this, I keep a patch cable going between CV out and CV in all the time, except when I'm playing some double stops, which I'll demonstrate. Normally, I leave that thing connected. That way, I have a fully monophonic synthesizer that puts VCO2 into low note priority mode. So here's what Oscillator 1 sounds like. Here's what Oscillator 2 sounds like. I leave this one in pulse, and this way I can kind of change the voicing just by changing the pulse width, and that's kind of, I give that second octave, first of all, let me take any modulation off. So I'll try to get him in tune. Okay, here's where the sample and hold comes in. So it's sampling a sawtooth waveform and a noise, and those are being mixed. That's the sample and hold mixer, as they call it. I don't obviously have this Carnival 9 sample and hold deal going on. I leave it in keyboard trig. That way, the sample and hold only gives a new voltage on each key press. That allows me to add just a little bit to the filter section here to give me a little bit of randomness in the timbre of the sound. So as you can hear, so normally it's the same thing each time I hit it. There's no velocity or anything like that. But if I add this, it's just a little bit, It's just to give it a little bit more humanness, so to speak. The keyboard CV is, of course, how much the control voltage from the keys tracks the filter cutoff, and I leave that at roughly just over half. If this is set too wide, a lot of times when you're playing bass lines, you might get it speaking exactly like you want it in this range, but you go for a low note, and there's nothing there because it's like there's no upper harmonics. So I dial that down just a little bit and then raise the cutoff frequency. That way I get a little more juice on those bottom notes, because you really, it's just like playing down here. Anything below E is like playing a 5-string bass. So it's like anytime you go down there in that territory, it's to make a statement. I typically kind of stay above that range, but it's so nice to have, some low notes, especially when you couple it with Oscillator 2. So while they're in tune, it's not that big of a deal, but I don't want them to be exactly in tune. that's where the independent modulation for each oscillator comes in. So now what I'm doing is I add just a tiny little bit of LFO to that second oscillator, and I keep it really slow. This is just to give it some pitch modulation. See how it's just barely moving? And now I add some sample and hold random pitch offset to it. So that's even more randomness being added to give it a little bit more organic feel. Now, I typically only engage the second oscillator if I'm doing double stops or if I'm doing a type of, a more synth based sound, or if we're in the middle of like a dance set and I just need to give it a little bit more oomph, on the. However, if I want a more aggressive sound, if I need to give it a little more grit, then I'll engage a little bit of ring mod. And that especially is effective when you start adding the pitch, offset there to second oscillator. So yeah, I can quickly change any of these parameters, on the fly during a song. I mean, it's really simple. It's just, you're starting off with like kind of a normal bass sound. It's a beautiful filter. Oh, that's another thing too, is that by the interaction of the, because what the ring modulation does is it actually ring modulates the square or the pulse oscillator. So the relationship of the pulse width between the two oscillators makes a huge difference in the timbre. Here's just the ring modulation by itself. Lots of different things you can do there. I forgot one thing. Double stops. So one song in particular we do that has double stop bass part in it is Peg by Steely Dan. So what I'll do for that is I'll have both oscillators kind of matched. Less pitch variation. And I mean, I'm doing this very quickly. And I remove that patch cable from the CV, from the CV in only, because that's what you need to do to break the connection. If you refer back to my my video on the ARP Moodifier, you'll see that that's That's the part of the connection that needs to be broken in order to restore normal functionality, normal duophonic functionality. So here's how that goes. Let's see, let's do peg. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and so on. Anyway, there's that. So that's basically it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I was able to inspire you or help you out in some kind of way. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.